perhaps familiar topics that we were talking about last year, and there's a strong sense of deja vu on this one. Hate speech. That was a bit of a war cry. In fact, it was pushback on hate speech, which kind of launched the Free Speech Union. Now it's come back with a slightly different hat on, but it's not fooling anyone. Instead of hate speech, it's hate crime, says the government. Jonathan Ayling from the Free Speech Union joins us. Kia ora, good morning. Happy New Year. Is it too late for that?
I was wondering, are we still allowed to say that? One way or the other. Great to be back with you, Andrew.
Now, hate speech, that was kind of the thing that launched the movement, as it were, or at least pushback on that. Hate crime is, this is just a slightly different flavour of the same ice cream?
That's exactly right. So in 2021, as your listeners will remember well, I'm sure, following the release of the Royal Commission of Inquiry report from the Christchurch attack, the government tried to change our hate speech laws. And while any endeavour to challenge speech that is hateful, that is bigoted, that is exclusive and intolerant, we would support, we utterly reject the idea that the government is well placed to tell Kiwis what they can think or say.
Yep.
Last year, we ended up having to encounter something similar where, despite Parliament eventually abandoning attempts to change our hate speech laws, not least of all because of the pushback coordinated by the Free Speech Union, police nonetheless had taken up the baton to train their cops to recognise, record and respond to hate speech and hate crime.
Yep.
We were deeply troubled by that, given Parliament had explicitly decided not to change the law there, that police had decided they would move ahead with that nonetheless, and the fact that New Zealand does not have hate crime laws at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What the Law Commission is doing, though, now, last week they released a consultation where the Minister of Justice has said, well, should we have hate crime laws? And Andrew, the basic premise of our response to this is, Paul Goldsmith, if you ask stupid questions, you're going to get stupid answers. And I think he's asking a pretty dumb question here. He should know better than to ask, should we have hate crime laws? Why? Because hate is a subjective term, and it's the critical undermining feature of hate speech laws. It's the critical undermining feature of hate crime laws. Law, the rule of law, which is a core tenet of liberal democracy, is about objectivity. It's about all of us being treated by the same basic rules. And hate, while I don't want to say it's unimportant or unpowerful, it is an emotion.
Yeah.
And the government and the law is not well placed to tell us how to regulate our emotions.
But hey, free speech to everybody, including people like Paul Goldsmith, for example. He's just asking the question, surely, and the good people at the Free Speech Union and those that support them could probably answer that question politely for Paul Goldsmith. And honestly, that's what you're asking people to do in response to this, right?
That's exactly right. So we are running a campaign to support the Kiwi public in ensuring that they respond clearly to this, you say, legitimate question. And I think it is at one point legitimate. We should be willing to ask these questions. However, I would also have two comments with regards to that. Where we currently have legislation like the Harmful Digital Communications Act that is actively being used, and this is with reference to some other cases that we're running at the moment. If your listeners are familiar with our caseload, the Harmful Digital Communications Act has been actively used to suppress journalists' speech online. The Chinese Communist Party has plants here in New Zealand who are actively using our own law to undermine legitimate questions there as well. I would say the government has a narrow bandwidth and they need to focus on amending the legislation that actually will have the most impact. And asking this question is using resources that they should be applying elsewhere. The second thing I'm very concerned with is the answer is, well, we're just asking the question. But we know that there are other actors in this space, and I would suggest a future government perhaps could be one of them, who would not simply be interested in the answer to these questions, has a horse in the race, so to speak, of what the answer should be. And this report, one way or the other, even if Minister Goldsmith, as Minister of Justice, chooses to shelve it, it will sit there. Advice from the Law Commission is not easily ignored, and it will sit there if they do suggest hate crime laws until someone is willing to put that in place. And at that point, I hope your listeners, I think the erudite and well-informed listeners of Radio Rhema, I've no doubt will appreciate what's at stake here, that there is no meaningful difference between hate crime laws and hate speech laws, because there is no reason to support hate crime laws and not to support hate speech laws if we believe the government can outline technically in legislation what hate means and how to suppress it, why can't that then apply to speech of a similar kind? And I would suggest that the fundamental flaw here is the belief that the government is well placed to oppose hate. And while hate should be opposed, it is not the government's job to do so.
As you mentioned beforehand, though, the police seem to be a little bit confused as to whether or not we even have hate crime laws. In fact, some of their policies that would suggest that they have. If this is something which has a strong response from the public, if a clear message is given to the Minister of Justice to say, we don't and we don't want, then maybe this will eventually trickle down to that thin blue line and say, you know what, guys, there's a clear message, not just from the public, but from the Justice Minister. This is not something to be wasting your time on. Could there be some positive things in the fact that we're having the conversation and certainly that we're allowed to make submissions to it?
I think you're absolutely right. That is correct. At one level, we have already succeeded in pushing back against police there. And in September, October last year, when we became aware of the training that had recently been rolled out, leaked to us by senior members of the police force, we pushed very hard. And actually, that training was undone.
Yep.
And we have seen police engagement on that question change already. But more generally, I think your point is absolutely spot on, that by having this conversation, and perhaps this is Paul Goldsmith's ultimate claim, by sponsoring this conversation, good ideas are able to beat bad ideas, which is the core essence of free speech. And what that relies on, though, is Kiwis making sure that they contribute. And I think this is a point we labor to make generally. The whole idea of the marketplace of ideas only works if we're contributing to it. The idea that good ideas will beat bad ideas only works if people make sure they speak up. Because if everyone stays silent and only the people with bad ideas speak up, there's no reason to think that those people won't win. So this is why your listeners really must participate in these conversations and participate in the way we seek to defend the core tenets of liberal democracy. And I suggest it is impossible to imagine liberal democracy without freedom of conscience and freedom of speech at the heart of what we are seeking to build on here. The freedom to think for yourself and speak for yourself. So if your listeners go to freespeechsubmission.nz, you will see a submission platform there where you can submit on this consultation in 3 minutes. And if you would like to, you can say, this is a marvelous idea. Let's bring in hate crime laws. I should be the one that gets to decide what hate means. Yes. And that's fine if that's your tenet. But we will suggest some other reasons that actually hate crime laws are not a good idea. We're not putting words in anyone's mouths. You can amend those as much as you want to. But we do want to see the Kiwi public engage this question and make sure we stand up for the core freedoms that have allowed us to live in this prosperous and blessed nation.
As you point out, people are free to say, yes, I'd like the government to regulate my emotions for me. I seem to be doing a terrible job myself. However, if people wanted to find out more, connecting with the Free Speech Union and the submissions page, join the conversation on this one. Jonathan, thank you so much for the work that you do. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.